Alright, so I want to compare these three turbo actuators I have here. The stock one off the Greddy turbo, this Turbosmart universal actuator that I just bought, and then this Mamba actuator that is aftermarket actuator but made specifically for my turbo application, which is a 15G Greddy turbo. I wanted to show this. I'm actually going to take these both apart and show you the difference between the internals, because these actually both cost the same, and other than like the piece of the bracket that this came with that's still on the car, I don't really understand why you would pay $150 for this like I did when you could buy something really nice like this for the same price. So let's take a look inside. So you can see the Mamba actuator comes apart pretty easy with these 6 Allen screws. And now I'm just going to slide the lower housing off, and then there's a dust cover, dust boot, lower spring retainer, and then I've got the blue spring in there right now, which is the 22 PSI spring. And then this actually doesn't use a diaphragm, so if I pull this piston out, they've got kind of like a copper based grease on there, probably a high temp grease, and then there are 2 O-rings that seal it, and then that's it. It's just this piston, and this the shaft is attached directly to that piston. So if you go to install this and you if you're not lined up correctly with the shaft, if you cock this shaft at all, it's going to cause it to bind up in there. So it moves pretty freely, you know, just sitting here with no heat in it. And you can see how much play there is. It's quite a bit of play. So it's really just riding on the O-rings. It's not really riding on the housing in here. This spring kit here, you know, these are all just individual springs of different pressures. They've got this chart here that lays out the pressures for you, and you'll see when we get inside the Turbosmart how it's a little different on that one. So that's the Mamba actuator, and it did come with, you know, it came with a mounting bracket that's still on the car, comes with the clevis and all the hardware you need. So now on to the Turbosmart actuator. You might see me struggle with this one. I haven't had it apart yet. I did not buy the nice like spanner wrench kit that they have to get this thing apart. So I'm going to use some channel locks and a t-shirt. So this was $130. I bought one with a 10 PSI spring in it, because hopefully if my boost controller works the way I want it to, that's all I'll need to run 20 PSI. And then it came with this fitting, which is great because I'm going to swap this out. I'd rather have it coming out at a 90 degree. So it came with that. It also came with the hardware to mount it onto a bracket. Came with the jam nut, and then I bought the clevis separately for another $15 or so. So all in, about $150 for this, which is what I paid for that. I just don't have any other springs to swap in here, but you can buy springs from Turbosmart. I think they're anywhere from like $20 to $30 a spring if you want to put additional springs in there. So actually the reason I'm taking this apart is because Turbosmart only sells this universal actuator with a straight rod, and I need a bent rod for my application. And plus this rod is actually too long right now. So I'm going to take this apart. Hopefully I can get this rod off of whatever it's attached to, and then I'm going to heat it up and bend it the way I want it to be bent. And I'm hoping by the time I bend it, it's just the perfect length that I need. All right, so you can already see on the Turbosmart, now that I have that collar off, I've got the spring, I've got the tension off the spring right now. It's got this nice big diaphragm here. So it's actually using a diaphragm and not O-rings like the Mamba. And then I put pressure on the spring so that this thing, and kind of unloaded it so that this thing wouldn't pop out at me when I took it apart. But now that it's apart, I can undo this. So what you can see on here is that there's actually 3 different spring seats. So the spring that I have is the biggest spring that you can get in terms of outer diameter. It sits on the outer spring seat, but there's a middle size spring and even a smaller size spring. So you actually combine springs of different diameters inside here to get different boost pressures. And this spring overall, you know, I don't have much to go off of, but it just seems like if I grab the 12 PSI spring from the Mamba, you know, this seems like you've got a lot more control than this one. So that is what the inside of the Turbosmart looks like. And now I'm going to get this rod off of here and hopefully get this bent up the way I need it. Okay, so I've got a nice bend in my Turbosmart actuator rod now. So I'm gonna let this thing cool off a little bit and put it back together. Okay, so I got this thing back together. It was definitely tougher to get it back together without being able to slide something on here and compress the spring. And if I had bent these anymore, I wouldn't have been able to get this little bushing to go back on. So that's something to keep in mind, but I was able to force it on there. And I just did a test fit on the car, and it's still a little too long. So what's nice is they give you a really good amount of threads here. So I'm going to cut about maybe 3/4 of an inch off of here, and that should give me the length that I need to get it to fit. Okay, so I got the Turbosmart actuator installed, got it all set up. You can see it's quite a bit bigger. I still need to bend this AC line a little more, but it's looking good in there. I got 2 millimeters of preload on it, which is what they call for. And then I used my Mighty Vac to test it, and it looks like it's cracking right around 9 or 10, and actually doesn't fully open until like 15 pounds. And it's a 10-pound spring, so we'll see what it does. Okay, so I just got back from driving the car with the Turbosmart actuator installed, and 100% confirmed that this actuator is total junk. All of the boost spike and boost oscillation issues that I was having are completely gone now. The car makes boost just like it did, very steadily with this factory actuator, but instead of 5 psi, I'm making a really steady 10 psi, no spikes. So moral of the story is, don't buy cheap parts, even if they're the same price as the good parts. Like, I paid way too much for this because it was supposed to be you know, direct fit for my application, which it was. It fit great, it just didn't work. I have a feeling that the small diameter of this piston just can't compete in terms of kind of resolution and accuracy with that much larger diameter diaphragm that you saw in the Turbosmart, as well as just the quality of the spring and kind of the spring tension and the way that was set up. So definitely do not recommend the Turbosmart. And then Tile actually makes an actuator just like the Turbosmart that's universal, and it's already got a bent arm on it. I just couldn't find one in stock, so I went with the Turbosmart. So that's all for this video. I hope this helps somebody not make the same mistake that I did.